Today's discussion will be presented in three sections since we are recording it for a radio broadcast on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. You're welcome to post questions and comments during the session, and we'll try to answer them online. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Jason Miller, Executive Editor at Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.
Welcome to the discussion. My guests today are John Owens, the Chief Information Officer at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, George Chambers, the Executive Director of the Office of IT Infrastructure Operations at the Department of Health and Human Services, Bill Zielinski, the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for the IT Category Management in the Federal Acquisition Service at the General Services Administration, and Gary Lebovich, the Executive Vice President at Booz Allen Hamilton. Gentlemen, welcome to the discussion today.
Thank you.
Before we get started, let me set some context for our conversation. This discussion comes really at the perfect time. Without a doubt, IT modernization, digital transformation are hot topics in the federal community. The White House released its 36-point IT modernization draft plan for public comment in September. Over the next few months, it will finalize that strategy with a strong eye toward cloud computing, cybersecurity, and of course, agile development. Now, at the same time, Congress is considering a new approach for agencies to move money from legacy IT systems to new modernized platforms. The Modernizing Government Technology, or MGT Act, would establish working capital funds in each agency. Departments would be able to retain their savings for up to 3 years from systems that were modernized and consequently cost less. While legislation and strategies are nice, the real digital transformation work is being done on the ground inside agencies. The Office of Management and Budget reported in 2014 that over the previous year, agencies decreased the time it took to get their high-impact investments to deliver functionality by 20 days. That decrease, without a doubt, is much larger today. And you can see those reductions at places like the Treasury Department, which reported in 2016 that it cut the time it took to deliver incremental capabilities to 100 days from more than 220 days. And the focus on Agile and DevOps is clear in the contracting data as well. Information from Bloomberg Government from June showed that spending on Agile services increased to $368 million in fiscal 2016 from $242 million in 2015. That's across the 40 largest contracting vehicles. But as we know, it takes more than contracting and technology delivery. Its digital transformation also requires change in thinking by the workforce and contractors agencies hire. And as we've heard over the last 2 decades or so, it's rarely about technology. It's almost always about the people, the culture, and the approaches. And that's why we have our panel today. They're going to tell us how they're overcoming both sides of the challenge equation, technology and culture. So once again, my guests today are John Owens, the Chief Information Officer at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, George Chambers, the Executive Director of the Office of IT Infrastructure Operations at HHS, Bill Zielinski is the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for the IT Category Management at the Federal Acquisition Service at GSA, and Gary Lebovich, the Executive Vice President at Booz Allen Hamilton. So a lot to cover. I know I went through a whole litany of fun things, so let's just start really at the beginning of the conversation and talk a little bit about how the IT modernization train, if you will, how you guys are getting on it, what's the technologies that are really driving it. George, let me start with you.
Sure, and thanks for inviting us. At HHS, in concert with Homeland Security, we have the Cybersecurity Automation Program. It's a 3-pronged approach where we are doing our continuous diagnostics and mitigation work and using, I have responsibility, you can tell from my title, for operations and infrastructure. I work hand in hand with our Chief Information Security Officer. And while he works with DHS to understand what that architecture is going to look like, I'm responsible for the deployment. And so we've now deployed agents throughout the enterprise in order to gather information. We have a second step, which is an aggregator and a data analytics platform, and all of my associates here will attest to that. And third, we're looking at a risk management, governance, and security tool that will allow us to present in a dashboard fashion all of the security opportunities and concerns in a single way across the enterprise. In addition to cybersecurity, we've done the traditional automation. We took email as a service into the cloud and across the enterprise over the last 2 years. And we've been spending a lot of time now with the more traditional Windows 10 deployments and in support of the HSPD 12 initiative. We're also doing derived credentials to ensure 2-factor authentication for all of our endpoints.
All right, so a lot going on there. Let me just back us up on, when you talk about the cyber automation, CDM is a big piece of that, but it seems like there's other pieces there.
Correct.
The risk management piece, can you just talk a little bit more about what that entails?
Yeah.
Governance and
Yeah. So we've chosen a tool. I'm not going to get into the specific vendor right now, but the idea is to have an aggregator is an important part of the platform, and we've worked with DHS to standardize that like all the other agencies. But we also had the desire to have a standard dashboard for decision making and reaction and mitigation, and so we take the metrics that are coming up from the aggregation platform. In this case, I believe I'm saying Splunk, and we're using Archer, which is also a recommended platform for the governance, risk mitigation, and compliance portion.
All right, interesting, because I know risk management will play into a broader conversation. Right. Before we do that, let me turn to John Owens. Now, John, you and I have talked many times over the years, and one of the most impressive things about PTO is really you guys took not just a toe into Agile, but really the big jump into Agile. So talk a little bit about the emerging technologies that you guys are looking at to really continue to move that process forward.
So over the last 8 or so years, we really have developed a DevOps Agile culture at the USPTO. I wouldn't call it textbook Agile. It's a little government flavor thrown in, but it is more Agile than not. So above and beyond just what George talked about, which certainly USPTO is also doing, because cybersecurity and the rest play and risk management play an incredibly important role in everything that a federal CIO does. We have been on a multi-year journey to shut off legacy systems, and we have. The base core examination system, known as EDAN, was replaced by Patents End-to-End Docket Application Viewer. We are in the midst of rolling out the Office Action Tool for patents to replace the legacy tool OAKS. We have built new tools that didn't exist before MyUSPTO. And in a very DevOps-like fashion, we have blue-green environments for quick rollouts. We do patches to bugs sometimes within 24 hours of discovery to deployment. We are making sprints last 2 to 3 weeks on most projects, and we are doing at least quarterly deployments to production. And at the meantime, not only have we turned off those legacy systems, but we've also fixed our core infrastructure. For example, our website just hit a measured this year of 5 nines, which quite honestly, when I got there, it didn't even have one. The rest of our systems are well designed to operate in 4 nines capability across multiple data centers, including the cloud. So as far as replacing legacy systems, some of which were developed back in the 1970s, some of which still run on, as we talked about before, COBOL and AGOL and languages that quite honestly don't even exist anymore. We are well on our way of doing that, though there are, it's not always easy. And I would agree with your statement. It's mostly a cultural change than anything else.
And we'll get into that piece later on, but let me just back up. As you've closed down these systems, you've taken them totally offline. It's not like you're running dual environments. So I guess my question that always pops up is, are there savings?
There are. Today,
it's a loaded question, I know.
There are, but then my customers have waited for decades to build new functionality. So our capital investment this year is about 55% of our overall budget. Now that varies year to year. Some years it's been 40, some years it's been 60, and that's over operations and maintenance. So whenever we can, we shut off those systems, we roll them into that money into capital investment funds to make improvements not only on, for example, Docket Application Viewer didn't end, we're adding features and functionality that examiners have been waiting on for a decade. That work has slowed some, and then of course we've looked to replace other important examination systems, and that's just on the patent side. We're making strides on the trademark side, though slowly. Not every project is perfect, mind you, but overall progress is strong.
Excellent. All right, let me turn to Gary from Booz Allen. One of the things that you guys must work when you work with your clients, what are some of the things that they're asking from you, or what are you seeing with whether it's RFPs and RFIs or just regular work?
Yeah, we're seeing a dramatic change in the methodologies that agencies are asking for, much like John just spoke about, a huge increase in requirements around agile development and DevOps in particular. You know, the old model was the old waterfall model where you went out and you interviewed a bunch of people, you got a set of requirements, then you went away for 6 months, you came back, you said, here's the application, the client said, that's not what I asked for, or our needs have changed, and then you went back and you got a change order, and the whole, I can't imagine how we did that over time, but that's the way the industry worked for probably 20, 25 years. We have seen a dramatic change in requests for agile development methodologies and approaches. And more particularly now, this approach around DevOps, and how do we have a continuous process from the actual requirements to the application development to the maintenance and to the deployment. And so we as an organization have made a huge investment in all of those capabilities. For us, frankly, it's a much better environment. It's a much more challenging environment. The interaction with the clients who are working on these projects for us just makes it much more enjoyable. We're able to rapidly develop, showcase what we're doing, make changes, come back. To John's point, the velocity of our ability to turn around applications and get feedback is orders of magnitude better than what it used to be. And I think the results speak for themselves. We see some of these systems now that are much more robust. There's a lot less change over the process. And we're able to get to implementation faster. So I think it's a win-win for everybody.
All right, I have to ask this maybe basic question, but I use Agile and DevOps as synonyms. You seem to kind of put a fine line. Bill's shaking his head, so we're going to hear from Bill in a sec. But when you talk about Agile, when you talk about DevOps, what's the difference?
Well, it's
just me.
I don't know if there's it's kind of a mindset as much as anything else. It's this notion of working interactively with the clients to sort of figure out what's the best set of requirements and how quickly can we showcase what we're doing and get feedback. I think with DevOps, it's a much more efficient process. It's the connectivity between the requirements, the development, and the implementation. The old model, the maintenance and enhancement was sort of off to the side. Now that with DevOps, we're able to have a continuous process, integrated set of programs and platforms that allow us to go from the beginning to the end in a much more efficient way.
John, jump in real quick.
So DevOps really extends the culture of Agile, that iterative nature of development, into the operational area. The ability to quickly roll out a change or a patch without disrupting the flow, and then roll back quickly or flop between blue and green environments, as it were. So it takes that same rapid concept of close interactions and extends it not just with the development and the contractor and the customer, but also into the operations, which is 24/7, which is security, which is everything at the core of what the government has improved for the decade before, and bringing all of that together. So DevOps as a culture, unlike Agile, which stopped at the development for a long time, really brings operation unity with the development side, the customer, the contractor, all in one family.
That's actually very helpful, because I think we in the community always kind of use it as synonyms, but when you talk about from an operations perspective versus Agile. So Bill, you were shaking your head too. You bring to this discussion a much different perspective, and an important one, not just the contracting side, but really the broader GSA side. So talk a little bit about what you're seeing from the desires of emerging technology. Maybe start with the Agile DevOps discussion, and then we'll move kind of backwards.
Absolutely, thanks, Jason. So I'll agree with my counterparts here. When we start talking about it from the development of that system into the operational environment, what I will also say is for many agencies who are carrying out that work and executing on that work through contracts, you also have to ensure that the acquisition strategy as well as the structure of those contracts will match to that. Otherwise, these folks who are actually executing on the ground are fighting an uphill stream, trying to figure out how to make the contract work to what their desired operating state is. So some of the work that we do in GSA is helping agencies figure out how they can both develop those acquisition strategies, but also structure those contracts to be able to fit what they're trying to do from an operational standpoint. And Jason, back to what you said earlier, when you take a look at that IT modernization report that the administration put out for public comment, you mentioned a little bit about both from a technology standpoint, what's being kind of pushed and proselytized through that document, but also in terms of the approach that they're asking agencies to take. They're also looking for agencies to consider things like shared services, to take a look at already kind of pre-competed government-wide acquisition contracts. So a lot of the work that we're trying to do in GSA FRSA in the IT category of the Federal Acquisition Service is trying to ensure that as we see that policy statement come out, where we're going to put the focus as a government, ensuring that we have the contract options, that we have the solutions in place that really create the easy buttons for agencies to really be able to reach those technologies and cut down even further on those time frames to help them understand how they could structure those contracts to match to what the desire is. So we're part of that ecosystem of delivery in IT, but we're really looking at that place that sits in between industry and agency execution and helping to ensure that they can move that along quickly.
All right, hold on, Gary. Just before I want to ask Bill one last follow-up. I'm going to put you on the spot. So this is unrehearsed, Bill, so you know that. Agile contracting, we've seen a huge increase in the number of agencies wanting to spend money. Any plans yet for a separate Agile BPA or whatever you want to call it? I'm going to put you on the spot, so the answer could be no.
So I think there's two things, Jason. I think one, we already do have within IT Schedule 70 and a framework for Agile contracting. So an Agile contract as opposed to introducing Agile methodologies into contracting. So going back to how agencies structure those contracts, those days of having large-scale, big bang, large dollar, long-term contracts, kind of back to the point that Gary made, as opposed to being able to say, let's really figure out how we're going to deliver and match the contracts we put in place to that. So we're working on that all the time to introduce Agile concepts and frameworks into our contracting.
I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of contracting, but Gary, jump
If
in.
I just make a point, Bill raised an interesting point. For us as a contractor, there are some agencies that really are struggling with the Agile model. A lot of them are used to having a deliverable set of objectives, and now with Agile, it's it depends. It could take 2 weeks, could take 3 days, and so some agencies are really struggling with how do I validate that you're giving me what I asked for. We've even had IGs come to us and say, look, we don't know how to evaluate this. We have a checkbox, we have a list of things we need to check on, and in an Agile development, we can't necessarily predict when things are going to get delivered. And so that's a bit of a struggle. There are some agencies that are much farther ahead, but from where we sit sometimes, it takes a little bit of education. And having a strategy that helps define that is really helpful.
Gary, you're taking us down the culture path because that's part of that culture. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we can jump into that discussion. You're listening to the panel discussion, Keys to Digital Transformation in Government, sponsored by Booz Allen Hamilton on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.